Dear Chosen One, this moment was never random. You did not simply arrive by chance, nor were you lucky. You were drawn by something ancient, something sacred, a divine pull that came not with thunder, but with silence. It moved through the depths of your spirit like a soft current, leading you toward a soul the world overlooked, while others passed by, unaware or indifferent. Your heart stopped. Your spirit saw what eyes could not. You heard the unspoken ache, not because they cried out, but because heaven did. And in that cry, you were sent, not with a plan, not with signs or certainty, but with a quiet knowing. Something eternal stirred in you. You didn't come to rescue or to fix. You came to be, to carry the sacred into a moment disguised as ordinary. There in the stillness, you became the answer to a prayer no one else heard. Thank you for standing with this message, not just in attention, but in presence. If you've supported, your gift has gone beyond content. It has been a seed into awakening. But whether you give or not, you are seen. Your presence here is a signal. Your listening heart is enough. If something inside you lit up just now, if your chest burned in silent recognition, it's because this is not a message, it's a summons. Comment 99. Not as a trend, but as a declaration. This is activation. If you feel called, like this video. If you know deep down that your story is still unfolding, subscribe. What's ahead has already been written. You didn't stumble into this. You were summoned. You are the quiet response to a silent cry. This story isn't fiction, it's memory. A memory your soul came to reclaim. Settle in, Chosen One. The time has come to remember why you were sent. You were chosen to lift a fallen angel without a word, without a sound. They weren't a random friend, a fleeting stranger, or a passing romance. No, they were placed on your path with surgical precision. This was not coincidence. It was covenant. Your soul was assigned. You didn't consciously sign up for the mission, but your spirit knew. That is why you felt pulled to them. Even when there was no logic, why their pain echoed inside you, even when they never spoke it aloud. Because they weren't just broken, they were sacred. A hidden angel whose fall was invisible to the world, but loud in the spirit, and heaven answered with you. You were not sent to be loud. You were sent to see, to recognize them without needing proof. You didn't come with healing in your hands, but presence in your being. You saw the flicker behind their smile, the heaviness beneath their laughter. You felt the stories hidden inside their silence. Others saw strength, you saw weariness. Others admired their confidence, you noticed the fragility underneath. How can you hear someone who says nothing because you are not moved by noise, you are moved by spirit? You operate on a frequency only the chosen can feel. Their soul called out in spiritual Morse code, and only you were tuned in. This wasn't about saving them. It wasn't charity. It wasn't obligation. It was alignment. Before your first breath, your spirit had already agreed. When they fall, I will find them. That is why you couldn't walk away. That's why letting go didn't feel like release, but like betrayal. Because the bond wasn't made of emotion, it was made of mission. They never asked to be saved. They didn't wear their pain on the outside. But heaven saw, and heaven moved through you. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those crushed in spirit." Sometimes He draws near through you, through your patience, your discernment, your stillness. You didn't speak healing, you embodied it. You didn't chase spotlight, you became a sacred shadow, a sanctuary wrapped in flesh. You were the lighthouse that didn't flash. You were the shelter that didn't shout. and in the silence, they felt seen for the first time. What if you were never sent to fix them? Chosen one. What if your mission was never to speak the truth, but to embody it? What if your presence was the message and your silence the sermon? What if the real assignment was to remind them they had never been abandoned, that even in the shadows heaven had never looked away? Think of Harriet Tubman, called Moses by many. She wasn't loud. She didn't lead with declarations or crowds. She moved in silence, guided by vision and a holy instinct. Her path wasn't broadcast, it was whispered by God in the dark. Every return to rescue another soul was obedience no one else could understand. And you, yes, you have walked that same obedience. You moved when it made no sense. You stayed when logic screamed leave. You saw someone falling, and your spirit remembered a call you didn't even know you had answered. 2 Corinthians 1:4 says, He comforts us so we can comfort others. That's why your pain wasn't wasted. Every scar trained your eyes. Every sleepless night sharpened your discernment. Every tear made your heart deep enough to hold what others drop. Your own wilderness shaped you, not to make you bitter, but to make you ready to carry someone else's wound without collapsing under the weight. That quiet strength they felt around you, that was heaven, cloaked in your stillness, And now you see it clearly, none of it was random. The past didn't break you. It baptized you in preparation for them. Think of Robin Williams, a man whose laughter healed millions while his soul quietly fractured, surrounded by people yet unseen, because the smile was loud and the pain was silent. How many chosen ones missed it because the mask was convincing? That's why God raised you, not to be impressed by appearances, but to discern the soul beneath them. You don't wait for breakdowns to show up. You feel the tremors before the quake. You move by intuition, by knowing, by spirit, like Fred Rogers, who didn't perform or entertain. He simply showed up, quietly, consistently. His entire ministry was presence. That's what you've done, too. You've whispered to the child inside the broken one near you. You are not alone. You are not discarded. You are seen. Isaiah 61:1 says, The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bind up the brokenhearted, not to reach the crowds, but the one. And sometimes the value of that one is so great that your entire life is rerouted just to cross their path. Your obedience may not have been visible to the world, but it was holy. And though no one may ever say thank you, the angels have already recorded every moment you stayed, every time you held a spirit too heavy to stand, every silent battle you fought for them in the realm they'll never see. You didn't love with convenience. You loved with eternity. That's why it stretched so far, because it was never yours. It was divine. Look at Anthony Ray Hinton, imprisoned for 30 years, yet never let bitterness steal his light. His quiet hope freed more than just himself. That's your spirit, too. You've been placed beside someone imprisoned not by bars, but by shame, memory, or spiritual amnesia, and you weren't sent to destroy the cell. You came to remind them they still have wings. John 1:5 says the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. You didn't come to fight the dark. You came to be the light so undeniable it couldn't be ignored. You didn't demand change. You awakened remembrance. That deep soul knowing they once carried but forgot, you reminded them who they were. You weren't there to alter them. You were sent to unveil them. Beneath pain, beneath betrayal, beneath the identity they took on in survival, you saw the original design. You remembered it for them when they couldn't. While others asked for performance, you offered presence. While others feared their fire, you sheltered it. Even when your own flame flickered low, you shielded theirs. Why were you the one to see beauty in their brokenness? Why did your heart ache for them before your mind even understood, because your spirit remembered what your body forgot? This was not just a meeting. It was a divine collision, a soul activation. You didn't bring solutions, but you became their anchor. You didn't force peace, but you radiated stability. You didn't shout truth, you carried it in your posture. In a world drowning in noise, your silence became sacred weight. That's what chosen ones do. You felt their fading light, and you didn't panic. You answered it with calm, with certainty, with light. Have you ever wondered why their face would surface in your mind without warning? Why your heart felt drawn to someone you barely knew? It wasn't coincidence. It was recognition, spirit to spirit. Something deep in you knew something eternal in them, beyond names, beyond roles, beyond reason. Your soul remembered. You looked through the mask and into the essence, and in that moment, you didn't just awaken something in them. You awakened something ancient in yourself. Luke 17:21 says the kingdom of God is within you. And when you saw the divine in them, it wasn't mere compassion. It was the kingdom recognizing itself. They didn't need your rescue, they needed your remembrance. And when you remembered who they were beneath the weight of forgetting, something in you came alive too. This was never a one-sided rescue. It was mutual ignition. One soul dimmed by the world, one carrying fire in silence. And when your paths crossed, it wasn't just a bond, it was a spark. Not only for them, but for you. Could it be that their silence woke your assignment? That their pain realigned your purpose? That this connection wasn't about healing them alone, but calling you back to why you were sent, because this was never just about one person. It was about your pattern, the blueprint behind your calling. And now, you must ask, were they the only one, or have there been others' faces you can't forget? Connections that made no sense, yet echoed in your soul like a divine whisper. What if this wasn't your first rescue, only the first you recognized? What if every mysterious pull, every sudden ache for someone else's pain was not random but part of a divine orchestration? You didn't give permission, but your soul gave participation, and now the veil is lifting. Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for the good of those who are called. You weren't just called to a moment. You were born into a mission, wide, deep, quiet, and undeniable. Every soul you've ever felt strangely responsible for, none of it was chance. You've been operating as a guide, a torchbearer, a carrier of memory, without even knowing. But now you know. Now it begins to make sense, like Maya Angelou, who didn't just write words, she wrote deliverance. Her voice didn't fix people. It reminded them they were never truly broken. Her being was the sermon. Her presence healing frequency. That's what flows through you. A quiet liberation, a gentle thunder. Have you noticed that strangers confess their sorrow to you without knowing why? That people feel safe in your presence even when they can't explain it? That's not chance. That's assignment. That's what happens when your soul radiates remembrance. You walk through battlefields unarmored yet untouched because your weapon isn't metal. It's memory. The memory of divine identity. The light buried beneath trauma. The original self, waiting to be reawakened. You don't have to fix. You don't have to force. Your very presence realigns because you, chosen one, are sanctuary in human form. In a collapsing world, you become holy ground, like Brandon Stanton, creator of Humans of New York, who didn't heal people by preaching. He held space for their stories to matter. He reminded them they weren't invisible. That's what you've done, whether you've realized it or not. So now, the question is not why them. The question is who's next. Who is already making their way to you. drawn to the light you carry, not knowing how to ask for it. Peter 4:10 tells us to use the gift we've been given to serve others as stewards of God's grace in all its forms. You've been stewarding a grace that cannot be seen, not through sermons, but through sacred stillness. You've held others where the world let them fall. You didn't wait for a breakdown. You moved when the light began to flicker. And that is the mark of the truly chosen. You move before collapse. You see what others miss. You feel what others deny. You walk into silent fading and respond with unshakable presence, just like Mr. Fred Rogers once did. Again, we remember him not for his performance, but for his presence. He believed that to be truly present was enough to change the course of a soul. And you, beloved chosen one, never had to do anything sensational for heaven to trust you. Heaven knew, heaven saw, heaven sent. Isaiah 58:10 says, if you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the afflicted, your light will rise in the darkness. That's what you've done. Quietly, endlessly. You've poured from a hidden well. You've sustained souls with strength no one saw you gather. But heaven saw. The light you carry was never for the stage, it was for the shadows. And it shines still. There were others around them, but no one noticed they were thirsty. No one saw the drought in their soul. But you did. And your reward wasn't applause or recognition. It was clarity, revelation, the quiet unveiling of your deeper assignment. What you satisfied in them wasn't hunger of the body or longing of the mind, it was spiritual dehydration. And you brought living water, without ever demanding thanks. You came empty-handed but full of heaven. And they drank without even realizing they were parched. One final story. Chadwick Boseman, the world saw the strength, the roles, the legacy, but behind the screen. He carried his battle in silence, and still, he inspired millions. But what if? What if one soul near him knew? Not from words, but from spirit. What if someone quiet, sensitive, awake, stayed near not to fix, but simply to witness? That's what you've done. You stayed close to the ones falling quietly. You held space with no agenda. You became the miracle that no one saw coming. So now, chosen one, look again. What if every heartbreak you felt, every intuitive pull you couldn't explain, every soul that shook you to your core, what if none of it was random? What if each one was a code, a spiritual signal, not just to awaken them, but to awaken you? This path wasn't just about their healing. It was about your rising. Because with each silent rescue, you are being refined, shaped, formed into the living embodiment of divine remembrance. Their fall wasn't dramatic. No explosion, no collapse the world would notice. It was quiet, so quiet that even those standing inches away couldn't hear it. But you did. Your spirit heard what ears never could, in the pause between their sentences, in the smile that came too quickly, in the eyes that danced but never lingered. Others saw strength. You saw retreat. Others called it grace. You recognized survival. Camouflage wrapped in charm. Their soul was slipping not from the world, but from themselves. A divine being dimmed, not by failure, but by a world that never understood how to hold their light. Have you ever wondered why your chest tightened when they entered the room, why your spirit leaned in when they spoke? Even if their words were simple, because you weren't seeing a person. You were encountering a radiant being, a fragment of heaven, flickering under the weight of rejection, betrayal, and misdirection. You felt it before they could speak it, the ache behind the laughter, the silent whisper I used to believe. But now I'm just surviving. This wasn't ordinary sadness, it was divine disconnection. A soul who once stood in the courts of heaven, now trying to survive in a world of noise and performance. How many sacred ones walk among us, pretending to be fine not because they are weak, but because no one ever told them your holiness is safe here. Isaiah 42:3 says, "A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not snuff out." That's what you saw in them, a wick, still burning. Barely, but burning. Sacred, fragile, not gone. They were never made for this world, and that is exactly why it hurt them. Their softness mistaken for weakness. Their wonder called immaturity. Their silence seen as withdrawal. They were too celestial for a culture that only understands volume, so they started shrinking. Not because they were small, but because no one gave them permission to remain vast. No one looked at their wings and said, "You can still fly." But then you came, not with a savior's robe, not with superiority. You came in silence, with recognition. And in that quiet moment, heaven touched earth. Have you realized it yet? Why your heart couldn't ignore them? Why their silence echoed in your bones? It's because you weren't seeing with eyes. You were seeing with memory. The memory of spirit. The memory of who they were before they forgot. You didn't see them as broken. You saw the ancient purity beneath the cracks. That essence in their dreams. That holy residue in their sadness. They didn't just seem different. This wasn't random. This was divine orchestration. Psalm 34:5 says, "Those who look to him are radiant, their faces never covered with shame." But what happens when someone stops looking? When the pain bends their gaze, when shame smothers their light? That's when God sends a reminder, a companion, a chosen one like you, not to teach them how to shine, but to remind them. They already do. You didn't have to give them wings. You only had to whisper you still have them. That's all it took. Not a miracle, just a reminder. Like the ones Van Gogh never received, misunderstood, tormented, forgotten in his time, and yet carrying a beauty so profound the world would one day weep in its presence. His letters reveal a soul caught between breakdown and brilliance, darkness and divinity. What if someone had seen him before the world dismissed him? That's who you are to the forgotten angels of this era, the one who sees the masterpiece before the masses recognize it, the one who recognizes eternity in human form. And it goes deeper, because angels don't always fall with thunder. Sometimes they fall in stages quietly, politely, wrapped in good manners and polished perfection. They blend in, into roles, into routines, into families. They show up and do what's expected, but inside, their soul is crying out in a language only heaven and the chosen can understand. You didn't find them in their chaos. You found them in their stillness, in the carefully composed life that concealed a catastrophic disconnect. And that's why it was you who noticed. Ephesians 5:14 says, "Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." But the awakening didn't come through a sermon. It came through you, through the eyes of someone who said nothing but saw everything. You didn't just walk into their life. You were planted there, assigned, sent not to fix, not to save, but to reflect, to hold the mirror to their soul until they remembered who they were. Look at Florence Nightingale. She didn't wait for applause. She walked into war zones, into places of unseen suffering, and turned pain into restoration. Her reward wasn't fame. It was the lives she quietly lifted. And doesn't that feel like your story, too? How many lives have you stood beside in silence, carrying light with no request for recognition? This mission was never about being the hero. It was about finding what others missed, finding the divine hidden in the overlooked, picking up spiritual signals too quiet for words. While others read faces, you read souls. You've been holding space for fallen angels long before you knew that's what they were. And your spirit, quiet, tuned, resilient, became the lifeline no one else could offer. 1 Samuel 16:7 says, "People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, and sometimes the Lord looks through you." Your gift isn't in the words you speak, it's in what you feel without needing explanation. That soul knowing has always been your map, and the ache you've carried for something more, for something sacred. It wasn't restlessness. It was evidence, the mark of a calling too large to fit into surface-level living. Think of someone like Jim Carrey, a man who made the world laugh, while quietly battling spiritual emptiness. Behind the comedy was a seeker, someone who once said, "I wish everyone could be rich and famous, just to know it's not the answer." That's the kind of ache your soul recognizes, not because people tell you they're hurting, but because you feel it in the space between their words. You hear it in the way they say, "I'm fine." Hebrews 13:2 says, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so some have entertained angels without knowing it." But what if it's deeper? What if you were sent not to host an angel, but to hold one, not to lead them, but to walk beside them? Because God doesn't always send an army. Sometimes He sends one. He sends you. Ends. And now, chosen one. Here comes the revelation your spirit has been circling but not yet named. What if the angel didn't fall by accident? What if their descent wasn't failure, but choreography? What if their collapse was designed not as defeat, but as activation, because in anchoring them, you didn't just save a soul. You remembered yourself. You remembered your own clipped wings, not torn by sin, but by exhaustion. You remembered the long, hollow seasons when you, too, faded in plain sight, when your light was dimming, not from rebellion, but from weariness. And suddenly, this wasn't just about helping them. This was about the two of you being used to awaken each other. This wasn't about perfection. This was about divine collision. Two celestial flames, not meeting at full brightness, but meeting in vulnerability. And in that soft, holy ache, eternity stirred. Have you ever wondered why they entered your life exactly when they did? Why their pain mirrored yours in haunting ways? Why their silence felt familiar? It's because heaven doesn't waste pain, and heaven never misses timing. This wasn't random. It was revelation in motion. Romans 11:29 says, "The gifts and call of God are irrevocable." That means no fall can cancel the calling. No season of silence can undo what was written in heaven. Not for them, and not for you. This includes them and you. They did not fall out of purpose. They fell into it, into the precise place in the story where you would both begin to rise again. Chosen one. What if your role was never to save them in isolation, but to unlock a joint awakening, one that wouldn't just thaw their numbness, but would stir the dormant glory hidden deep within your own spirit? Think of Nelson Mandela. The world saw a prisoner, but heaven saw a prophet in process. After years in confinement, he did not emerge bitter, he emerged refined, wiser, rooted. His fall was not failure, it was foundation. The dark became the womb of light. And it's the same with them. That angel didn't descend to be discarded. They fell to be reignited in your presence. What if you were their flicker of God's memory, and what if their descent was your rising signal? The world saw them functioning, smiling, showing up, performing life, and assumed they were fine. But heaven knows the difference between motion and meaning. Behind the practiced laugh, behind the social ease, something sacred was slipping. Not from rebellion, but from exhaustion. That deep kind of tiredness no sleep can cure. The fatigue of a soul too long disconnected from its origin. Have you ever felt that kind of tired, beloved? The ache no compliment can soothe, the emptiness that settles in when hope no longer expects a door to open. That's where they were, not angry, just numb, spiritually exiled in plain sight. Job 30:20 echoes their silence. I cry to you, but you do not answer me. I stand and you only look at me. And so they stopped asking, stopped hoping, stopped believing they were even worthy of an answer. And that's when you arrived, not with solutions, not with strategies, but with stillness. You walked in like a whisper present, anchored, luminous. You didn't rush in to fix, to analyze, to convert. You just existed, and your existence became proof. Maybe heaven hadn't gone quiet. Maybe heaven had arrived through you. John 1:4-5 says, In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And that's what happened. The darkness in them didn't disappear because they fought it. It lifted because you illuminated it. You didn't fight. You shined. And in doing so, you became something sacred, the proof that hope still lives. Think of Princess Diana. She didn't carry sermons. She carried presence. Her eyes noticed the unseen. Her touch made the hurting feel whole. She didn't need a platform. She was the message. Her noticing was healing. And that's what you did. Your presence disturbed their apathy. Your tenderness cracked open their numbness. And your silence was louder than any sermon they'd ever heard. Could it be that your greatest spiritual gift was never your voice, but your presence? They didn't need someone to diagnose their ache. They needed someone to remember them, to recognize them, before they disappeared completely. And you did. You remembered when others forgot. You stayed when others walked away. You held their worth like a sacred treasure, even when they had none left to hold themselves. And now heaven speaks. It wasn't just for them. It was for you, too. Ezekiel 34:16 says, I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. And God did that through you. You became his hands, his heartbeat, his timing without ever needing the title. You didn't know you were on mission. You simply followed the pull. And that's what it means to be chosen. Your spirit moves before your mind understands why. Look again at Keanu Reeves, a man marked by deep loss who responds not with performance, but with peace. No spotlight chasing, no grand declarations, just quiet love, hidden compassion, gentle frequency, and still. He changes lives. That's the kind of vibration you carry, subtle but seismic, quiet but eternal. So now, chosen one. Ask yourself, what if every soul you've carried was part of a divine map? What if every burden you bore in secret wasn't interruption, but instruction? What if their silence was never just a cry for help, but a call to your own awakening? Because this has never just been about their healing. This has been about your remembrance. Philippians 2:13 says, For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. And he has been working in you all along. in the quiet, in the ache, in the mysterious pull toward pain that wasn't yours, but somehow still was, in the souls you couldn't walk away from. Even when it made no sense, in the moments when love felt more like obedience than emotion. This was never just about helping the fallen rise. This was about remembering you were sent. He has been working through you all along, in the quiet urge to stay, in the unexplainable pull towards someone whose light was fading, in the ache that whispered, "Don't let go." Every act of grace you offered, every silent rescue you stepped into without knowing why, it was all part of the unfolding. His purpose expressed through your willing spirit. You didn't need thunder. You didn't need fire. You didn't need angelic announcements, because you were the evidence. You were the shift. You were the silent answer to the prayer they stopped praying. And now, the veil begins to lift. The mystery becomes clear. You weren't just sent to help them. You were sent so that, in saving them from forgetting who they were, you would remember who you are. You didn't arrive with a platform. You didn't carry credentials. You didn't perform a miracle. Chosen one, you became the miracle and you never even knew it. That's the paradox of heaven's plan. You weren't trying to be anyone's savior. You weren't looking to be anyone's light. You just showed up. You spoke with sincerity. You listened in a way that made silence seem again. You were just being yourself, and in doing so, you reignited something in them they had buried so deeply. They almost believed it never existed. Isn't it wild to consider that your presence alone brought breath back into what they thought had long died? You weren't just comfort. You were confirmation, proof that God hadn't turned away. Proof that their cry didn't vanish into the void. When their lips stopped praying but their soul whispered, "God, if you still see me, send a sign." It was you who appeared, not with thunder, not with fire, but with a quiet presence and divine timing. You arrived at the trembling edge between surrender and collapse, and you didn't even know that heaven had calculated every step of your arrival. Isaiah 65:24 says, "Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. And you, beloved, were the answer." Heaven didn't send a prophet. Heaven didn't send a priest. No. Heaven sent you a soul not trying to fix, but to reflect. You didn't point to their brokenness. You reminded them of their beauty. You didn't quote scripture. You became it. Through tone, through presence, through soul. You reminded them they were still seen, that their divine imprint had not been erased, only obscured. Have you ever paused to wonder how your presence alone could stir someone back to God? That's because chosen ones don't preach from pulpits. They preach through essence. This wasn't just about religion. It was about recognition. Because when people lose faith, they rarely need sermons. They need someone who still sees them. And that's what you did, without trying to change them. You awakened who they already were. You spoke directly to the core, the royal residue hiding under ashes, and that shook them. Think of Malala Yousafzai, silenced by violence, forgotten by many. But someone saw her. Someone believed in her voice before she believed in it herself. That belief reignited her. And now she speaks for millions. But first, someone had to speak for her. You've done the same. You've believed in souls too tired to believe in themselves. You've seen what others ignored. And in that vision, lives were changed. 1 Corinthians 1:27 says, "God chose the foolish things to shame the wise, the weak things to shame the strong." Heaven doesn't choose based on title. Heaven chooses based on trust. Sometimes the greatest rescue doesn't come with fanfare. It comes from someone who simply refuses to look away. That was you. To them, it made no sense. How could anyone walk into their darkness and still call it sacred? How could anyone see them as chosen when they felt so discarded? But that's the mystery of light. It doesn't need to explain it. It just shines. You didn't barge into their life. You stood anchored, glowing, quiet, a living lighthouse, a soul whose presence said without words, "This is not your grave. It's a passage." From the outside, it looked so simple. Just a moment, a conversation, a gentle act. But inside them, their entire world tilted, back toward hope. Mr. Rogers again comes to mind, not for his fame, but for his faithfulness. Week after week, he reminded children, "You are loved just as you are." That was the frequency of your presence. You didn't declare it with words. You whispered it with energy, spirit to spirit, light to light. John 8:12 says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." But some people don't know how to follow Christ until they meet someone carrying his light. That was you. Your stillness, your warmth, your decision to stay. That was the sermon they didn't know they needed. They thought they had sunk too far, that heaven had stopped listening. But then came your light, unapologetic, unforced, undeniable. And something shifted, not all at once, but like the first warmth before sunrise, slowly, gently, and with every moment you stayed. The narrative began to unravel, not the story of failure, but the story of redemption. Think of Brandon Stanton. He doesn't preach. He listens. He gives people space to be seen. And they weep not because of what he says, but because someone finally looked deeper. That's you. That's what you've done. That's the mark of the chosen, not to dominate, but to dignify. Psalm 18:28 says, "You, Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light." And how does he keep the flame alive? Through people like you. The lamp you carried into their cave wasn't for performance. It was for navigation. It showed them they weren't alone, and in the glow of your faith, theirs began to flicker again. Now remember Anthony Bourdain. He fed nations, made the world feel like home, but behind the laughter was a struggle few saw. What if one more soul had recognized his ache? That's why your awareness matters. Chosen one. You don't just see smiles, you see souls. And that sight, that vision, it saves lives. In the quiet of their spirit, something whispered, "Maybe I'm not invisible." It was fragile, a trembling breath, but it carried power. Maybe God still sees me. Maybe this isn't the end. And in that sacred, tiny moment, faith flickered. Not yet a flame, not yet fire, but enough to lift their eyes, to breathe again, to believe again, to remember. And now, chosen one. Ask yourself, what if? What if that moment was everything? What if your obedience rewrote the ending of a soul's story? What if your decision to show up was the miracle that turned silence into song? You followed the whisper. You didn't have a blueprint, but you showed up, and heaven moved through you. Esther 4:14 asks, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? You were sent to one. But what if that one was only the beginning? What if your obedience has already begun a ripple, a holy awakening that reaches far beyond what you can see? What if your calling isn't just to restore individuals, but to awaken generations? Stay close now. Because what you're about to see next will transform everything: your story, your scars, your questions. Heaven is preparing to reveal why certain souls were placed in your path, over and over again. And this time, you will see it for what it truly was, a divine conspiracy of remembrance. And now you know why. Why you've always felt just a little different in rooms where others seemed perfectly comfortable. Why you've carried a depth, an intensity, a sensitivity that never seemed to match the noise of the world around you. From the beginning, something about you defied easy explanation. Not just emotional, but spiritual. You've always felt everything, not just your own ache, but the invisible sorrow of strangers. Not just sadness for yourself, but waves of grief that came out of nowhere, crashing over you like storms from another soul's sky. You've asked yourself more times than you can count, what's wrong with me but chosen one? There was never anything wrong with you. There was something divine about you. Something heaven encoded, something set apart. Romans 8:19 whispers this truth: creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. And those children are often the ones who never quite fit, the ones who carried burdens they never asked for, the ones who sensed long before they saw, the ones who couldn't ignore the pain around them because they were assigned to feel it. What you once called a curse, that aching awareness, that deep emotional weight, was never a flaw. It was evidence of your mission. You weren't made to float on the surface. You were crafted for depth, for discernment, for healing, for interception. While others walked through the world untouched, you walked through, activated your heart, picking up spiritual frequencies like a sacred radar. You've walked into rooms and instantly felt what was unspoken. You've stood beside smiling people and heard their silent screams. You've sensed danger in charm, sorrow in laughter, collapse behind charisma, and you felt compelled to protect, to hold, to respond before logic could explain it. Why? Because you were assigned to be one who sees before others do. Think of Mother Teresa. She didn't save the entire world. She didn't question the ache. She obeyed the pull. She walked into alleys no one else would see. She touched people the world had forgotten. She didn't ask why she felt so much. She answered what was in front of her. And because of that, generations were changed. Not by noise, but by presence. Could it be that your seemingly quiet actions carry the same eternal weight? 1 John chapter 3:18 says, "Let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." You've done that. You've loved by showing up, by staying, by listening, by simply being there when no one else was. And here's what you must know now. Your overwhelmed heart wasn't a sign of weakness, it was divine equipment. You weren't designed for shallow waters. You were born for the deep. That's why small talk drains you. That's why superficiality suffocates you. That's why you feel physically exhausted around false energy. Because your spirit isn't wired for what's shallow. It's attuned to what's sacred. Your sensitivity isn't a flaw, it's spiritual radar. You feel truth. You sense energy. You respond to pain that's never even been voiced. That's not overreacting. That's divine discernment. You are tuned to a frequency others don't even know exists. That's why some people make your spirit come alive and others, no matter how kind their words, cause your soul to retreat. You're not being judgmental. You're being protective. You don't read people. You feel them. Alan Watts once said, "You are the universe experiencing itself. That's what you are to others, a mirror, a soul-shaped reminder of something eternal. Even when you're silent, your presence says, 'I see you, I know what you carry.'" You're not alone, and that's why your grief has often felt mysterious. Why you've cried tears that didn't belong to you. Why you've mourned without knowing the name of the one you're mourning for. Because some of your mission is intercessory. You feel so others don't have to bear it alone. You mourn to open space for someone else's healing. You discern to protect You awaken to activate. You love to restore, and could it be? This is why you've always been drawn to pain. Even before you understood it, Galatians 6:2 says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ." And you have fulfilled that law in secret over coffee, in car rides, on sidewalks, in fleeting encounters that left people whole again without understanding why. You've helped people you never saw again. You've saved lives you'll never hear about. But heaven has recorded every moment, and now, heaven is pulling back the curtain, inviting you to see just how vast your impact has been. Think of Maya Deren, an artist whose work went unseen for decades, yet sparked movements long after her death. She didn't know the seeds she planted. She simply obeyed the vision. That's you, chosen one, obedient in the unseen, faithful in the silence, planting destinies without applause. Your sensitivity, your radar, your ache. These were never burdens. These were tools, and heaven is just beginning to show you what they were meant for. You weren't just walking through life feeling energy. You were operating on a divine frequency. While others saw encounters, you experienced activation. You weren't just empathic. You were prophetic. Your soul read pain, hunger, fear, and hope before a single word was spoken. Why? Because you don't just exist. You function. You carry something powerful, something holy, and God knows it. Heaven marked you long before anyone else could name you. When God assigns someone to carry light, He also grants them spiritual perception discernment the average heart cannot hold. You were never too sensitive. You were highly tuned for a sacred task. That's why they found you. The broken ones, the fading ones, the forgotten ones. Not by accident, but by design. They were the ones who didn't know how to say, "Please help me," but whose souls screamed in your presence. And you heard them not with your ears, but with your spirit. Have you ever wondered why people open up to you so quickly? Why a stranger can sit beside you and within moments confess what they've never dared speak, not even to family? It's not random. It's not coincidence. It's because your presence carries something holy. Safety, healing, restoration. Luke 6:19 says, "And all the people were trying to touch him, because power was coming from him and healing them all." That power wasn't always in the words. It was in the proximity. And like Jesus, you carry a frequency that heals before you speak. Not because you are Him, but because He lives through you. You weren't sent to dominate with doctrine. You weren't sent to instruct with theological precision. You were sent to restore the air, to shift the atmosphere, to make pain unravel simply by standing in the room. And perhaps the wildest part, you thought this was normal. You thought everyone could feel what you feel. You thought everyone's chest tightened when someone broken walked into the room. You thought everyone sensed shifts in emotion like earthquakes in the spirit. But no, this is your gift. This is how heaven wired you. What the world labeled too emotional, too intense, too sensitive, was actually sacred intelligence. You were never overreacting, you were perceiving. You were built for the invisible battlefield, Hebrews 5:14 says. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. You didn't train in classrooms, you trained in tears, in silence, in sleepless nights, in spiritual aches that made no earthly sense. You weren't just empathetic, you were prophetic. You didn't just feel, you carried. And what you carried wasn't soft, it was fire. You carry breakthrough. You carry discernment. You carry the kind of light that breaks chains in people without ever raising your voice. That's why they find you. That's why, even when it hurt, you stayed. That's why, even when it drained you You returned. Not because you couldn't walk away, but because your soul recognized the assignment. It was written into your design before your first breath. You stayed because you were sent. Think of Sojourner Truth. She didn't just speak, she shifted atmospheres. She walked into rooms where her voice wasn't welcome and made heaven listen. She didn't need volume. She carried weight. And so do you. You've carried spiritual assignments in silence, thinking it was just part of your personality. But now, heaven is showing you what it actually was. And here comes the revelation that breaks something open inside you. What if you've been living under the full weight of your anointing without realizing it? What if every emotion you suppressed, every instinct you downplayed, every moment you thought you were too much was actually divine frequency? Sacred technology embedded into your soul by heaven itself. What if the very thing that made you feel different was the proof that you were chosen? Jeremiah 1:5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. You were appointed, set apart, not by accident, but by blueprint. And now that you are starting to see it not as a burden, but as a divine design, you will stop apologizing for your light. You will stop shrinking. You will stop numbing your knowing. You will begin to walk boldly. Not arrogantly, but with holy clarity, like someone who knows they were assigned. Look again at Robin Williams, a man who healed the world with joy, even while his own soul bore weight no one saw. Many creatives, many artists, many healers carry this same thing, a sacred sensitivity, an empathic power, not for performance, but for presence. That's you. Your joy heals. Your tears cleanse. Your stillness speaks louder than most sermons ever could. And here is the most urgent part of all. There's another layer to your calling, another weight, another soul, another divine encounter already moving toward you. You don't know their name yet. You haven't seen their face. But they are coming, and they will need everything you've carried until now. Because they are not just hurting, they are chosen too, but they've forgotten. Their light is buried beneath shame, silence, and sorrow. And heaven will send them to you not for advice, but for remembrance. And yes, God is trusting you with this, trusting you to help them remember, just like you remembered. Romans 12:6 says, "We have different gifts, according to the grace given to each of us. And your gift, chosen one, is sacred perception, healing presence, silent breakthrough, the ability to feel the call of someone's spirit when their voice doesn't have the words. That's why heaven trusts you. That's why people cry in your arms without knowing why. That's why certain souls collapse into your energy. Even if they don't understand what you are, only that they feel safe." Think of Carl Jung, a man who dared to speak of the invisible, of archetypes, of collective pain. He was more than a psychologist, he was a seer, cloaked in logic. He knew what many forgot, that some are wired to carry the unseen, just like you. So what if you were never sent to fix the world, but to feel it, to intercept it, to recalibrate it, one soul at a time? What if every ache in your chest wasn't dysfunction, but divine signal you are a vessel of remembrance? You walk into lives not to rescue, but to awaken, not to lead, but to mirror. And now, the next soul is already on their way. Prepare yourself. Because this one won't just be hurting, they will be destined. And your presence will do what sermons cannot remind them, that heaven has not forgotten who they are. Are you truly ready? Chosen one, because what's coming will not only stretch the limits of your sensitivity, it will shatter the surface understanding you once had of your purpose. It will awaken you to the divine weight of your presence. This is no longer just about feeling deeply. This is about knowing that every moment, every whisper, every pull, every ache, every tear was part of a scroll written in eternity. Are you ready to see yourself as heaven has always seen you? Here's the truth most aren't ready to hold in the architecture of heaven. Nothing is random. No meeting is meaningless, no conversation is wasted. No timing is off. What we call coincidence is often just our way of avoiding the unbearable beauty of divine orchestration. But the time for illusion is over. Psalm 37:23 says, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way." You didn't show up by chance. That tug in your heart wasn't baseless. That soul you couldn't ignore, the one who looked fine but was falling. They weren't a detour. They were the assignment. They weren't a side plot in your story. They were woven into your scroll long before you ever opened your eyes to this life. You may have felt unsure, awkward, unqualified, but heaven wasn't. Heaven was certain. Heaven was precise. You arrived not a moment too soon, not a breath too late. It was the moment eternity had circled in red, a divine appointment aligned with sacred collapse. And you didn't just respond with kindness, you fulfilled a prophecy. What if that one gentle act you nearly brushed off was the divine key to someone else's survival? Consider Corrie ten Boom, a woman who didn't plan to be a rescuer, but obedience made her one. She said, "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God." And like her, you didn't plan to be someone's last light. You just stayed when your spirit said stay. And in doing so, you didn't just save a person. You saved a path, a lineage, a legacy, Isaiah 58:10 says. If you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, your light will rise in the darkness and your night will become like the noonday. That's what you've done. You reached into someone's fog of confusion and pulled them back into clarity. You didn't just touch a life. You shifted a timeline. You interrupted generational synths. You became the turning point in a bloodline and never even knew it. Have you ever wondered why certain souls find you again and again even when you're tired? Even when you think your presence couldn't possibly matter? It's because heaven sees what you don't. Heaven sees the ripple. The one you rescued, they weren't just carrying themselves, they were carrying others. They were a flame meant to ignite 100 more, but their spark was dying. Until you walked in, and when your presence rekindled their light, that light reached farther than you will ever see. In the natural, you may never know, but in the realm of spirit, you became a catalyst for awakening. And now, chosen one, the scroll is still unfolding. The assignments are still coming. The whispers will grow louder. The ache will become direction. The sensitivity will become strategy. And the love you once doubted was enough will be revealed for what it truly is, the very language of heaven. Think of Desmond Doss, the medic who walked into the fires of war without a weapon, and still saved 75 souls. He didn't fight with fists, he fought with faith. He didn't lead with violence, he led with conviction. His quiet courage pulled men back from the edge when chaos screamed louder than clarity. And that's what you've done. Not with a sword, not with sermons, but with obedience. You thought it was small, but it was never small. It was surgical, strategic, sacred. You were the exact spiritual remedy their soul needed in that moment. Not because you were flawless, but because you were available. Because your spirit said yes to a call your mouth never heard. And that's what made it holy. That's what made it eternal. You didn't come with a blueprint. You came with presence. Proverbs 16:9 says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Heaven didn't need your credentials. It didn't need your resume. Heaven needed your yes. Heaven needed someone chosen, and it chose you. God knew the very moment that soul would dangle on the edge, right at the border between endurance and surrender. He knew who would walk in. He knew you would obey the invisible urge to speak, to stay, to sit, to ask, to care. You weren't just the answer to their prayer. You were the fulfillment of God's plan. That's why you couldn't forget them. That's why it haunted you, even when logic said, let it go. That's why your mind couldn't make sense of it, but your bones called it truth. Because your soul remembered what your mind had forgotten. This wasn't random. It was written. Let's return one last time to Fred Rogers. When asked how he helped so many children feel safe, he answered simply, I just try to be present. That's what you've done. No spectacle, no stage, just sacred presence. That's why it mattered. That's why heaven trusted you. And now, as you look back, can you feel it, that strange pull toward people you barely knew? That quiet instinct to reach out at inconvenient hours, that whisper that said, they need you now. You're seeing it, aren't you? The patterns, the blueprints. What looked like coincidence was divine choreography, a celestial setup, a spiritual map. John 15:16 says, you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. You were appointed not to rescue everyone, but to leave lasting fruit. Fruit in the form of lives rerouted, destinies reignited, hope restored. You didn't stumble into their storm. You were assigned. You weren't a kind stranger. They didn't meet a coincidence. They encountered a solution. You were positioned, planted, set like a cornerstone in a crumbling moment. You walked into chaos not as a bystander, but as a stabilizer. You were the calm in the room, the quiet in the noise, the presence that shifted the spiritual weather. And now, here is the astonishing part. If heaven was that precise about your past assignments, what does that tell you about what's coming next? Because this wasn't a one-time mission. This wasn't an isolated act of compassion. This was training, initiation, a divine unveiling. This was God showing you your function in a world starving for real light, sacred presence, and unwavering discernment. You weren't sent just to comfort. You were sent to activate. You were designed for spiritual intervention, wrapped in ordinary life. Ephesians 2:10 confirms it. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. It was always part of the plan. You just didn't realize the scale until now. And just when you thought the assignment was over, the real mission begins. Because now, you've remembered. Now, the veil has lifted. Now, the next soul is already being prepared. The next moment is already forming. And guess who heaven is preparing to send you? Yes, you. The one who thought you were too broken, too quiet, too unsure, too weary. God sees you as the perfect vessel of grace, calibrated for healing, wired for redemption, anchored in presence. Get ready. What's coming will demand more of your light than anything before. It will stretch your boldness. It will call forth your highest spiritual authority. But this time, you will not walk in confusion. You will not question your power. This time, you will walk in remembrance. You will no longer think of yourself as just a good listener. You will understand you are a divine strategy in motion. You were never just anything. You were heaven's hidden answer wrapped in humility, now unveiled for impact. Romans 13:12 calls out with urgency, the night is nearly over. The day is almost here, so let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. And now, chosen one, it's time to armor up. Because your next assignment is already awakening, and this time you'll walk in full awareness of what you carry. The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. That's what you're doing now. Stepping out of the shadows, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with sacred awareness. No more shrinking. No more explaining away your sensitivity. No more apologizing for feeling what others overlook. That sensitivity was never your weakness, it was your radar. Divine, intentional, heaven-forged. This wasn't just a message. This wasn't just a moment. This was a summons, a holy call echoing through the chambers of eternity, landing inside the marrow of your being and shaking you awake. If something burned inside you while you read this, if something wept, broke open, or stood up in silent reverence, it's because your spirit already recognized the sound. You already knew. You've never been ordinary. You didn't just notice pain. You absorbed it. You didn't just hear words. You heard what wasn't said. You looked into eyes that said, "I'm fine," and saw the soul screaming behind them. Why? Because you were sent, planted, hidden in plain sight, a lighthouse disguised as a bystander, a warrior cloaked in compassion, a balm wrapped in bone. And now the veil is gone. The remembering has begun. The truth is loud. The fire is active. Isaiah 60 declares, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." You weren't the one in need. You were the one assigned. You were sent to lift what others buried, to love what others abandoned, to restore what others forgot, and to stand in the sacred space between collapse and redemption and declare with unwavering certainty, "Not on my watch." This was not a coincidence. It was divine trust, God choosing you again and again, because he knew what he placed in you would not fail, not under pressure, not in obscurity, not in isolation. So the questions that once haunted you, why do I feel so much? Why do I attract the broken? Why do I carry burdens for people I barely know? They're no longer your questions. You know the answer now. The question becomes, how will I walk now that I know who I am, because the answer has already been spoken? You are activated, awakened, confirmed. Jeremiah 29 mirrors the truth rising inside of you. His word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I am weary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot. That's what this is, that fire. It's not chaos, it's calling. It's not overload, it's overflow. You didn't imagine this path. You weren't too emotional. You weren't being dramatic. Heaven was speaking. And now, you've heard the echo of your own divine origin. So hear me clearly now. Chosen one, you carry fire. You carry alignment. You carry clarity. You carry answers for souls who don't even know what they're searching for. You are not fragile. You are fortified. You are not lost. You are launched. You are not weak. You are wired for warfare, but not the kind fought with noise or swords. You war with presence, with truth, with weight, with the kind of quiet force that only moves when it knows exactly why it was sent. Let us reflect one last time on Harriet Tubman. She didn't just walk people to freedom, she entered places of death carrying deliverance. When asked how she found her way, she said simply, "I listened to the voice of God, and he led me." That's what you've been doing all along. Listening, following, obeying a frequency few have the ears to hear. And because of that, you've changed lives. And so, if anything in this message stirred your spirit, if something in you rose up with fire or fell into holy weeping, then let that stirring settle now into conviction. You're not leaving this moment empty-handed. You are stepping out crowned with holy assurance. Heaven trusts you to carry quiet deliverance wherever you go. Thank you for walking this sacred journey, for lending your heart, your presence, your stillness, your fire. This was never meant to be whispered to one. It was always meant to echo inside many. And if you feel led to sow into this work, know this: every gift, small or symbolic, helps keep these words flowing toward those still waiting to remember who they are. And yet know this deeply, whether you give or simply type your amen in the comments. Your presence is cherished. Your seat at this table is eternal. As you close this page and return to the rhythm of your day, may the God who appointed you before time bless you with discernment so sharp you cannot miss the next assignment, courage so steady you never flinch at the weight of another soul's silence, and favor so radiant that every dark place you enter is compelled to remember the light. Go forth now, beloved. Carry heaven quietly, and know, a chorus of angels is already celebrating the miracles that will unfold because you chose to answer without ever making a sound.